Welcome to the Global Marketing Show, where we explore how language and culture impact global business. I'm Mannequin Pis, your host and president of Rapport International. Let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, listeners, wherever you are in the world. I'm glad that you are joining us today for another episode. I will introduce our guest in just a moment. But before I do, I want to remind you about Rapport International, the host of this podcast. They connect you to anyone, anywhere in the world in over 200 languages. And today's tidbit, that's the word I'm looking for, is consistency is key. Hungary celebrated its 1100th anniversary as a nation in 1996, and the Hungarians are particularly proud that they have preserved their unique language, Magyar, despite being surrounded and frequently conquered by other linguistic groups. So it is nice to hold on to a language because there are about 6,000 languages in the world, but we're losing a lot of them through TV, globalization, Netflix, and the advance of travel. The people who speak the languages are starting to die off as the younger generations are taking on more common languages. So hooray, Hungary, for keeping your language. Let me transition over to today's guest. Marta Gutka is a U.S. citizen by birth, but a career expat by choice. She's lived in major international media and government centers across APAC, EMEA, and the US. In 2025, she was recognized as one of the world's 50 most influential businesswomen making a difference for her impact on more than 100 communities, from the Mannequin Pis to the Merlion. So Marta, welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy. I'm excited to be here.
Let's start out with one of the world's 50th most influential businesswomen making a difference. So you have a tremendous amount of accomplishments. Let's talk about a couple of them that you're most proud of.
Well, that's a great place to start. And it's always kind of ironic to me that my career has been built on promoting good ideas, causes, and people who have, done a lot or accomplished a lot or have meaningful things to say. And yet when it comes to talking about myself, I'm the classic PR person who shies away from it. I would say that, there's been so many amazing people and visionaries and teams that I have worked with. So I've been utterly blessed in my career. Like you said in the beginning, I've worked on both coasts of the United States. I'm originally from New York State, Syracuse, and I've also studied and lived and worked in France and Belgium before moving to Los Angeles, which then in the role that I had there led me to Asia. And I've been in the region now for this is, I think, going on 22 years. So it's been, I was just doing the math before our call that I have to accept the facts that it's been 30 years last month since I joined America Online back in Dulles, Virginia, in the very early days of what we now all take for granted with digital communications and internet and SaaS technologies. So, that's definitely remains, a highlight of my career in terms of cutting my teeth on, kind of remote working, living, everything that we're doing now, both for the positive and for maybe some of the negative side effects that we've seen. But that was really the first place where I started working even more globally than my educational background had already allowed me to be. And so I've been on this global path my whole life. And that definitely is, from a foundational standpoint, one of the places where I always love to start, because it's kind of like everything old is new again. And everything that, the vision and the things that we had then, some of them have definitely come to fruition and some of them have not. But I've been the beneficiary of that really career defining moment. So launching some of, the first interactive television offerings, some of the first mobile devices where you could text and talk in real time with people, as well as the content communities that we created back then. I led the international channel at the time, and that's directly linked to, a lot of the work that you do as well. So I'll start there. And if you want me to talk about more, then I can.
Yeah, yeah. So, what led to you being voted as one of the most influential businesswomen making a difference?
In the past 10 years here in Asia, where I've been living all across Asia Pacific for the last 22 years, like I said before, I've had more and more involvement in empowerment types of roles and issues and campaigns, both as a volunteer, as a mentor to executives and leaders all around the world, as well as in some of the roles that I've had. But I think that that's where it comes from, just the profile and the reputation that I've had working in some of the most challenging environments during what we've now experienced, and it only continues, unfortunately, this very complicated, complex global environment since the pandemic. 6 years ago. Some of the recognition for the work that I did in markets like Myanmar, it definitely is a standout, as well as on the ground kind of support of impoverished communities and really starting to help educate the next generation of leaders on kind of new, higher consciousness leadership principles.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'd love for you to take me down into one of the communities that work with and give me a story about, how what you actually did. I'm fascinated by this.
Well, yeah, thank you again for the curiosity. So I'll go back to Myanmar just because it's still, I think, on my heart as a standout, not only for how progressive the company that I was working with was, as well as the passion and the beauty that I saw of the people in Myanmar. And I was working remotely from Singapore, but working as the head of global corporate affairs for KBZ Bank, which is a family owned bank in Myanmar, one of the biggest banks in Myanmar. And the work that we were doing was all about financial inclusion. So, as you can imagine, in Asia, we have a real polarization of you see literally some of the most breathtaking wealth you've ever seen anywhere, and some of the most heartbreaking poverty you'll ever see anywhere. And in Myanmar, it's considered, even by people like me who've been in the region for a while now, as still one of the last frontier markets. So that is to say, relatively untouched, relatively quote unquote underdeveloped, with a lot of natural resources, etc. But the people themselves, to give you a sense, some of the people that were on my team were earning probably the equivalent of like $100 a month. And that's an employed person. It was still a very cash-based society. So when COVID and the pandemic hit, you had like almost like old-fashioned runs on the bank, and then there was a lot of concern and I would say questions about even the spread of COVID through financial transactions, etc. So the bank itself was going through its own digital transformation internally, but importantly, it was on a mission to really empower and get more money in the hands of people through digital technologies, digital banking, etc. And that was a place where even people, the majority of the people didn't even have phones. So, quite a challenging situation. And of course, I then was in that scenario when the pandemic hit. So, you're simultaneously on this big visionary mission while trying to help then organizations and communities throughout the country, grapple with the fallout and the implications of COVID. So I won't get into too much detail of all the different things we were doing, but it was a very vast, multi-pronged approach, again, both top to bottom internally as well as then externally, working with everyone from, you know, aid kind of communities, UNESCO, you had Amnesty International knocking on our door because simultaneously there were already more and more growing concerns about the work, about the role that the military was starting to try to play again. So this was literally right before the military took over. So it was complicated and complex, and leading a team fully remotely, half of whom didn't speak English, was my remit.
Yeah, so I was curious about that because the number of languages that would be involved there. How did you handle managing a team that didn't speak English and all the outreach you were doing? And what languages were you working in?
Yeah, well, we all worked, collecting. It's fascinating the remarks that you said up front, just to go back to your remarks about kind of what's happening to the English language. How, on the one hand, in some places it's kind of disappearing. I believe it's in the process of disappearing, but it's also then merging and blending. But yet, it is the common language that people who don't speak English, we all come together. If we don't all speak each other's language, we come together with English. So you'll have many scenarios working in global or regional roles, where people are speaking, kind of whatever English they can muster. And I on a regular basis see a lot of misunderstandings happening, in that respect. The part of the team that didn't speak English on my team, they would have been 100% Burmese speaking, which is a very intricate, very foreign language. If you're familiar with like Thai language and the symbolism and all of that, it's very similar, I would say, to that. So to answer your question about how I dealt with it, we would have fully remote meetings like we're having right now, online. And I had every day a daily stand up where we would look at the priorities for the day, look at challenges my team was having, look at opportunities, celebrate wins, really trying to build and foster connections as well as coach and mentor them, as well as then get things done. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I had an intern who was a very young, just out of college, young man who was a translator. I had one of the more senior people on the team who also was a translator, and then a much older gentleman who was a former military person himself, very old school. He also was a translator. So we would do the meetings with simultaneous translation, and I would have to sit and listen while the translations happened. And then at the end of every meeting, I gave them a very simple template to take the meeting notes, which was announcements, agreements, and actions. So an announcement would be something like Marta is taking the day off tomorrow, or it is someone's birthday next week, or we have a public holiday. The launch has been moved, 3 months. And then agreements are things that we, would come together. Hey, there was this challenge and we've decided to handle it this way, or we're not going to do this anymore, or from now on, we're only going to do this. And then the actions would be the key things that people had to come back, do that day, and then come back and report on the next day. So either I would run the meeting in the beginning and the translations would happen during the meeting, and then the reports would come in, also translated both in English and Burmese. And then what I started doing was having the teams lead the meeting. And again, at all levels, ages, stages of their career, it was seen as an honor to then lead the meeting. And they'd have to lead it in Burmese, and I would have to then listen to the translation and talk back. So it was a bit of a long story, but yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I loved it because I got some really great ideas about how to run meetings. And then it's interesting that you were able to use internal people as simultaneous interpreters. So, for listeners and everybody out there, translation is written and interpreting is spoken. So I think in this sense, you were talking about interpreters where they were listening to the meeting and then repeating it orally.
It was interpretation and then translation,
Translation.
because in the meeting notes. And so I would have all three of the interpreters slash translations do the meeting notes using the template that I gave them. And then I would be able to compare and see, number one, I would be able to judge more accurately which one of them is the most accurate translator based on what I know I said. And then at the same time, I learned a lot about Burmese language. Even though I didn't learn how to speak it, I got to learn and see the way they think and the way they interpret different concepts and ideas based on the way the translations were done by all three people, because there would always be differences, as you can imagine.
Oh my gosh, this is so rich. Yeah, tell me more about how you didn't have to learn the language, but the different way of thinking. I'm fascinated by that.
Well, in every language, and you know this better than probably, I do at this point, but, when I was in even studying for my undergraduate, I studied mass communications, French and German. And one of the special classes that I took as kind of like an extra effort, extra credit class was to read Egalia's Daughter in French, English, and German. And I had to look for the sexism in the language. So I'll use a very blunt and abrupt example, but in the English version, it would say she was raped. In the French version, it's elle s'est fait violer. So she got herself raped. And right there, you start to see a little bit of a difference in perspective and attitude and assumptions. I'll use that as an example because it's a little bit easier for me to give as a specific example, but it was similar when I was reading the Burmese translations. You could see by the word choice and also maybe either the softness or directness or what had you as to how they were interpreting certain concepts.
That's fascinating. And now that you say that, I haven't thought of this in years, but when I was in Spanish class in high school, we read Man of La Mancha in Spanish to capture the difference of kind of the view of life.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I hadn't thought about that till now. That's a really good point. But I have there's so many examples of how cultures think differently and how words portray that. I find that in a lot of the favorite foreign words that I ask people about that will come up later. People will
Yeah.
bring up emotions that aren't known or aren't spoken about in English because we don't have a word for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to go back to what I was saying up top in terms of seeing this team in particular and this bank in particular as being very progressive, the concept of metta, which is loving kindness, is very, very prevalent and very important to the culture there. And so one of the things that we did as a company and as a team is every Wednesday we would have meditations and sharing, so we got to know each other on a personal level. But they wanted to be a bank with metta, being a bank with loving kindness. I don't think they really understood how progressive that concept really was. So for me, they were very, very special. But then when during COVID, for instance, we would then use Meta as an acronym to put posters around in the banks and whatever, and we would do it in English as well as in Burmese. But like M would stand for like mask up, so like really reminding people of the protocols and the rules and regulations during COVID and how to look after each other and take care of each other.
Wow. So meta is like META, but
M
in
E T M E
Burmese,
T METTA. Yeah.
METTA, but
Yeah.
it's a Burmese word that's said like that. So we just transfer it over to our letters.
I don't know the origin of metta. I think it's a concept of like Buddhism and it's a spiritual concept. And I unfortunately don't know the whole origin of it, but it was a core principle of the way that they wanted to work. And it goes back directly to their culture. And there's three different principles they had. Metta was one of them. And that was what they wanted to be known for.
That's fascinating. And that is so progressive for a bank because that's loving kindness is not something you'd associate with a bank. You'd think efficiency and accuracy.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll give a call out to my local regional bank, Middlesex Savings Bank. When I broke my leg, they had people that came to my house to accept my deposits or notarize things when I need it because I couldn't drive. It was a broken right leg. So my bank, Middlesex Savings Bank, actually showed some meta during that time period.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the world could use a lot more meta right now.
Yeah,
The one with
100.
two T's, the one with two T's.
Geez. Yes, yes. Let's absolutely be clear on that. So did you run into any Karen speaking people or Karen culture people in your travels around Myanmar or that area?
No, I did not.
No, okay. That's we were just over in Thailand, and I think there were refugees from that area that went up to the
Yes.
hills of Thailand, and I've been fascinated by the culture. Very,
Yeah.
very meta, very loving
Yeah.
experiences when we were there with
Yeah.
them.
And I would say that for most of Asia, the approach to life in Asia overall is pretty evolved and very, a lot of compassion, a lot of community orientation. No matter what the external, kind of output is, I think overall it's a much more gentle part of the world than maybe what we're used to.
So, jumping from meta to piracy, and I have to laugh about our email exchange. You talking about piracy, and I'm thinking pirates and
Pirates of the Penzance.
and you were talking about pirated intellectual capital. And
Yeah.
so I'd love to hear, some about some of your work in that area.
Well, that work actually is what brought me to Asia originally. I was living in Los Angeles, California, and I was gifted the opportunity to build the first ever West Coast public affairs department in LA at the Motion Picture Association of America. So the remit was to be the operational lead on all communications and strategies, proactive and reactive, responsive, in the heat of online digital movie illegal downloading, which was called piracy at the time. And everybody was suing everybody. You had Grokster, it was, Napster, Grokster, all of the studios were kind of trying to figure out how to deal with this issue. So my role was working with all of the heads of communications, technology, legal, and the C-suite, basically, of the major motion picture studios in the fight against piracy. And so when I first joined, there was, like I said, a lot of lawsuits flying around. I was getting calls all the time for comments. They didn't want to give a comment. I had to teach them it's a good idea to give a comment and help educate people. But what I ended up doing, and going to your point about piracy, is I said, look, my brother-in-law in his basement downloading a movie because he's excited to watch it is not a pirate. You know what I mean? And, a lot of people around the world, there is a very illegal aspect to what we were talking about. But I think the approach of just calling people pirates was not vibing and not resonating, particularly in the United States, let alone other places in the world. So what we ended up doing was removing that word from the whole conversation and elevating it to the value, focusing on the value of creativity and protecting the rights of the creative industries and the creators of art, film, music, media, entertainment, software, Gucci bags, whatever it is. So we were part of that whole kind of brand protection conversation, but movies at the time was a real big deal, and that was my focus. But your joke about piracy was exactly what I kind of then said. Look, we've got to speak a more heartfelt, emotive kind of language about this to educate people about what's happening, why it matters, and what they can do to help.
So that really resonates with me. Like if you call me a pirate because I download something, I'd have a knee-jerk reaction of not, I'm not a pirate, I'm not a bad person. And
Yeah.
you switch it over to protect the rights of the creators. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to pay something for that. I appreciate it. I want the creativity. Across cultures, that can be seen differently.
Very differently, and then you layered over it. So for instance, one thing that might surprise you is I had a global role in that job, as I said, and so global remit, but that's what started taking me to Asia because it was the hotbed of piracy in terms of source piracy. But once I started coming out here, I realized a couple of things. It was the source, but it was also the market. So there were like Australians, we had to work with the tourism board in Australia to help get Australians on board with the fact that, hey, you're going to Asia. They literally were making trips to go buy cheap stuff. Like Asia was known as the place you buy cheap stuff. So it was
Right.
kind of like a common practice. I'm going to go and buy fake, we won't say pirate anymore, but fake DVDs, fake Gucci bags, whatever it is, because that's, it was like a tourism, it was an attraction. to come out here. So even at that level, we had mindsets that we had to change. But then if you go to a place like China at the time, I think the market access would only allow, I think, 4 to 9 American movies into the country, period. And when I went to Beijing and I saw the actual DVD shops that were
Yeah.
fake DVDs, if I was a regular person, you would not know. It was
No.
so sophisticated and so slick. It's just like walking into any other store, and then there they were on display. So it was a very multifaceted, multi-layered approach, and we did everything from giving people rewards for kind of spotting real illegal activity if they saw it, to then again, here what they ended up doing in the region was creating a whole kind of academy, fostering local talent to and promoting and funding the ability of movie makers across Asia to make their craft.
Wait, it blows my mind. So you funded local movie makers in Asia so they would understand the value of creation and how to help
Yeah.
stop the
Yeah, by
fakes.
promoting, so by making it less all about Hollywood and making it more about local talent, you could then get communities across Asia to care a lot more about the whole issue.
That is brilliant because I don't hear about that anymore. When I first bought Rapport International, people didn't want to export to China because they were afraid of all the piracy
Yeah,
issues. And
yeah.
I don't hear about that at all anymore. So that movement of funding local creators helped stop it
Well, I mean,
or
I
slow it
definitely would
down.
say,
Yeah.
there's so much. I mean, ultimately in Asia, and what we talked about a lot with like the New York Times at the time or the Wall Street Journal is, the people who were really heavily involved in it at the time were actually organized criminals. So you had people running pirate operations who were the same people who were maybe, trafficking humans or selling drugs or whatever. So we simultaneously also told that negative story about, okay, maybe you don't care about hurting Tom Cruise's salary, but your money is actually going to really bad people. So you had to kind of tell like a more powerful, quote unquote, negative story, by also then bringing people on board to let the positive story override. And so that's where like the local artists and everything came into it. And you got people much more excited about the industries overall in Asia.
Wow, that's fascinating. Because I saw it at the time also playing out like in the legal courts, like companies were going to the Chinese court systems and trying to get them to change laws about the effectiveness for it.
Yes.
So you had the two sides working towards it.
And the legal system everywhere is like when I went back to CES a few years ago, I felt like the needle really hadn't moved on a lot of these conversations. And that's because the legislation doesn't really keep up with the pace of technology, consumer appetite. But to your point, I think those conversations, those litigations still do happen. Now it's equally about brand protection overall, whether
Yeah,
it's a brand as a person. You see it now with AI,
yeah.
Scarlett Johansson, having her face taken or whatever it may be. So it's taking on kind of even more complicated and nuanced layers. But the idea of brand protection is now, I think, really the topic.
Yes, I've seen that with all the AI, which is scary because it's really easy to go create an avatar of me and create videos and put it out, but that goes out to public knowledge and anybody can grab it and it's little old me, so I'm not worried about it. But if you're a famous figure or a politician, that's scary with how good it's getting.
There's that, and then it goes straight back to what is the value of creativity. If we're really convincing ourselves that AI can do it just as well as we can, then why would
Yeah.
you protect, your creation versus an AI creation? So I think that's the other, kind of I was going to say meta level, issue and question that people are asking.
We are running out of time and I could easily take this another hour or two. What are you doing now and how can we help you?
Well, I just most recently, I've just finished a contract. I've been living in Bali, Indonesia for the last year, and I was working with a property development group there that is working with Elle, the magazine brand that you might be familiar with,
Yes.
L and a few other really renowned, real estate companies and award-winning architects and designers to build the first ever El Resort and Beach Club in Bali. So that was quite a switch. And it seems like maybe more of a feel good type of a gig that I was doing, but it was really multi layered and amazing. And again, really tapped into the cross cultural components that we talked about. We
Right.
had a big Australian team and then a big headquarters in Bali with local and Indonesian talent. So that was quite a gift and a blessing. So I've just gotten back to Singapore, where I am mentoring still some executives. I've done that for the last 10 years. I don't really promote it massively, but I think now with the way the world is, I'm going to be out there and offering it a little bit more to people who might need help making difficult transitions or just even dealing with kind of the stress and the anxiety of the way the world is going right now. I'm doing that while I'm then looking for my next big, exciting opportunity.
So it's something that would marry in all this past experience. All right, so we'll keep our ears open for you. And you know that this question has to come up.
Yeah,
What's your favorite foreign word?
it's one of the hardest questions I think I've ever been asked, and I really, there's so many beautiful words and so many beautiful words, and French for a long time was the love of my life, and I also equally love German, and I've been studying Arabic in the last year and a half as well. So the world is just magical with the words. But the one that I chose is actually Indonesian, and it's thank you. It's the way they say thank you, and it's terima kasih, Terima Kasih, and it literally means, so someone does something nice for you or gives you something. Their way of saying thank you is receive love. So it's acknowledging the love that you just gave them and giving it back to them in a way. And I think that that's right now it's something that I'm trying to do in my own life on a daily basis, and I just love it. And it was one of the few words that I really was able to say when I was in Indonesia, so it became my favorite. And the way that you say it like quickly is makasi, makasi. But I love the deeper meaning of it. It's all about love, and the exchange of love.
Oh, that is wonderful. We all need so much more of that right now. When I roll out of bed and read the news, it's like, oh, can I start today? So I think I'll start with that word. It'll bring a lot of brightness.
Yeah.
Where can people reach you if they'd like to talk more or get in touch with you?
Yep. They can find me on LinkedIn. There's only one, Marta Grutka, Grutka, or they can email me at contact@martagrutka.com.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. You gave us some really valuable, deep insights that I can actually take back to my business and implement. So I appreciate that a lot.
I
It's been a
really
good
appreciate you having me. I'm excited to stay in touch and keep going.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And listeners, if you like this episode, pass it along to somebody else, or give us a 5-star rating, and make sure you get the next episodes coming out. But this one's particularly good to pass on to anybody that you know that is doing global business or might need a stellar implementation, community development, PR person with lots of global experience. So thank
We need
you,
to come up
and
with one word to summarize that.
yes, and there might be one out there with 6,000 languages.
We'll
Oh,
find it.
there was a word that I read recently. I'll have to find that. I'll send that to you. And if I can
Okay.
remember it, I'll bring it up on the next show. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Global Marketing Show. We started this podcast to capture the stories of people who do global marketing and work for companies that export, since those companies have higher revenues, higher profits, higher valuations, higher salaries, and more stability, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And if you know somebody who would be a good guest, introduce them to me, your host, Wendy Mackenzie Pis. If you'd like to learn more about global marketing or language translation and interpretation, visit Rapport International's Resource Center at www.rapport translations.com. Au revoir. Hasta luego. Ciao for now.